If any attendees on this training are interested in taking cases pro bono, please register at www.probononj.org. And on your registration, indicate specific areas of interest, case types, things like that. So thank you. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce this wonderful panel. We also have like special guest panelists. So first is Brittany Perrique Gomez. She's the Disaster Benefits Team Manager at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, also a member of the ABA-YLD Disaster Legal Services Program. Brittany is at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, which is the second largest legal service provider in the country and the largest one in Texas. She represents low-income individuals impacted by natural disasters, specifically in the areas of FEMA, Small Business Association loans, SBA, and Texas Health and Human Services Other Needs Assistance. She also assists with disaster survivors in clearing title to their homes in order to access financial disaster assistance. Brittany was a vice director of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division's Disaster Legal Services team from 2020 to 21. And Brittany's been recognized by Forbes magazine 30 Under 30 survivors. She's also been a guest lecturer at Stetson University School of Law's Disaster Law Primer and has been a frequent presenter on disaster-related legal issues at conferences nationwide. Next, I'll introduce Kathy Grunwald. Kathy is the disaster coordinator attorney at Legal Services of North Florida Incorporated in Tallahassee, Florida. LSNF provides civil legal aid to the 16 counties in the Florida Panhandle. She's responsible for bridging the knowledge gap between legal and non-legal responders to disasters. Prior to working with LSNF, she was an attorney with Florida Legal Services, representing indigent clients in Florida on poverty law issues and directing the statewide training program. She's a graduate of Florida State University College of Law and a member of the Florida and Georgia bars. Next, we have Oscar Joseph. Oscar began his career in emergency management with FEMA, in 1980, working for the state of Illinois under the Individuals and Family Grant Program. That program is now the current Other Needs Assistance program within FEMA. Oscar joined FEMA in 1998 as an IFG coordinator. Since then, he's served in many positions in the Individuals and Household Program, IHP, as a FEMA reservist. That's one of the programs we'll be talking about today is IHP. He's served in as Disaster Information Coordinator for Hurricane George in 1999 in Puerto Rico. And at that time, it was actually FEMA's largest disaster with over 300,000 applicants. And as we all know on this call today, the largest disasters are now much bigger than that. And currently, Oscar is the Community Services Group Supervisor and a coach and evaluator for individuals in his cadre. Next, we have Brian Miller. Brian is an Individual Assistance Liaison of the Individual Assistance Division in FEMA within the Response and Recovery Directorate of the Federal Emergency Management Agency under the Department of Homeland Security. As an Individual Assistance Liaison, he provides individual assistance subject matter expertise to the Individual Assistance Field Leadership and the Joint Field Office, federal coordinating officers, and 30 individual assistance presidentially declared disasters. Mr. Miller has been deployed to over 17 states and territories throughout his career, making him one of the most experienced liaisons in the entire nation. Mr. Miller started his career with FEMA in 2005 and has had over 30 deployments in his career. And then we also have our special guest, also from FEMA, Linda Avalos. Linda is in the FEMA Community Services Department. She assists with disaster legal services, and she's been with FEMA for about 6 years. And finally, I'm Marianne Flanagan. I'm an attorney at Legal Services in New Jersey. I'm also one of the vice presidents here in our management team. My experience and background are primarily in disaster relief and foreclosure defense. And so for the presentation today, I'll be reading through the slides, and it'll be kind of like a roundtable. These wonderful panelists we have will be sort of in contributing and adding a lot of wonderful information as we go through each topic. So the main topics we're going to cover today are the scope of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey and nationally, remnants of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey, what that means specifically, FEMA assistance for remnants of Hurricane Ida, and a lot of these different questions that advocates and our clients will have about how to deal with these issues. So this is just like a background I'd like to give for the scope of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey and sort of on a more national scope where we fit in with what happened to the entire country. So Ida began as a tropical depression on August 26 while south of the Cayman Islands. Approximately 6 hours later, it was upgraded to Tropical Storm Ida due to the force of its winds. So then on August 27th, it intensified to a hurricane as it moved over Western Cuba. And within 24 hours, it intensified from Category 1 to Category 4. And what that really means is Category 1 hurricane is sustained winds of 74 to 95 miles per hour. Category 4 is sustained winds of 130 to 156 miles per hour. So by the time it hit that Louisiana area, it was Category 4 with 150 mile per hour sustained winds. So that's really a part of the country that got that really strong hit of the disaster. And then the winds weakened to a tropical storm and then back down to a tropical depression on August 30th. So what New Jersey experienced was the remnants of tropical depression Ida or Hurricane Ida. Newark, New Jersey had about 8.41 inches of rain on September 1st. That was the most rain and the wettest calendar day on record in Newark since 1931. And the previous heaviest rainfall day in Newark was 6.73 inches in 1977. So it was a lot of rain, a lot of water falling really quickly. And one of the specific issues in New Jersey is with that much water falling so quickly, the ground just didn't have time to absorb it. And that's why we saw a lot of parts of our state flooded in areas that normally we wouldn't see flooding. Also, the eye of the storm passed directly over New Jersey, thereby causing significant destruction throughout the state. We saw there was severe flooding. We saw those tornadoes and the tornado damage down in the southern part of the state, and obviously, several deaths. So New Jersey, Louisiana, New York, and Pennsylvania were the disaster designated states around that time. This is a graphic that was in an article I found from a Twitter user. I just think it's a really easy visual to understand sort of the scope of what happened, how much water fell. This is the Schuylkill River, which is in the Philadelphia area. But if you just look at the normal elevation of the river and then the elevation of the river right after Hurricane Ida, it's like several feet of water. So this is just one example of sort of what happened, throughout this entire region. Remnants of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey. So we have the disaster designated counties under FEMA 4614 DRNJ. And the counties were updated. And we'll talk a little bit more about this at different parts of this presentation about like when and why things happen and why, for example, Warren County was added several weeks after some like Essex County and some of the earlier ones. But these are the areas that were disaster designated. So these are the areas that are going to qualify for the FEMA assistance that's available because they are the specific counties that were declared as disaster designated counties. So first, we'll just do a quick background on FEMA, what FEMA is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and why some counties were and weren't in the designated list, like I just mentioned. So FEMA exists for the purpose of helping people before, during, and after disasters. And it does this by coordinating with local government in areas that are at risk of or have been impacted by disaster. FEMA involvement can begin before a disaster happens. So in New Jersey, there was actually an emergency declaration issued for the entire state on September 2nd. And then the actual FEMA disaster declaration issued on September 5th. The emergency declaration, we won't really discuss as much today, but basically different types of declarations activate different forms of federal assistance. So there's a bunch of public resources out there that talk about sort of what these roles mean in more detail. So one of the important things to note is this part in bold here. Federal disaster assistance under the Stafford Act is intended to be supplemental in nature. It is not a replacement for state emergency relief programs, services, and funds. A lot of times when people hear about disaster, the first thing that comes to their mind is FEMA. They think of the federal government, but the way FEMA is structured is actually to step in as a supplement, not to be really the first resource. So again, that's why they're coordinating with the existing local resources. And the way the disaster declaration happens really is it begins at a local level. So first, whatever township or municipality or area thinks it may have this need for federal assistance, they're going to have to do some determination that whatever their local resources are, that they can tell the scope of this disaster event exceeds their available resources. So then what the locality does is they may go to the county, and if it exceeds the county's resources, the county will go to the state. If it exceeds the state resources, then the state governor will submit the request to FEMA for the disaster declaration. But because it goes from the ground up, not the top down, that's why you see this difference with why certain counties weren't in the original disaster declaration. Counties that never normally flood, never normally have these high levels of disaster damage, probably weren't predicting they would need to have disaster resources from the federal government. So literally as the water started to recede, right, they start to see the scope of damage, how much this damage exceeds available resources. And that's when they might go and say, you know what, Governor, we need federal assistance too. Please add us to this, please amend it and get assistance for us. And that was a very, I think, controversial hot topic right after Ida happened was, well, what about this county? What about that county? But if there's a process and the county actually has to request it, that's the way it goes again, it's bottom up. So this is just, again, a little background of that. And so we're going to talk about, some of these topics today, types of assistance, what happens next, legal issues, and recovery timeframe and planning. So FEMA, basic forms of assistance, this is just an initial background, but two of the most recognized forms are the Individual and Households Program and then Other Needs Assistance. And from the bios I was reading earlier, like I was saying, we have people on this call today who have extensive experience with both of these programs within FEMA. IHP, an Individual and Household Program, provides direct financial aid for repairs or displacement housing costs, temporary housing units like FEMA trailers, rental assistance, things like that. It's not a substitute for insurance, so it will only cover the person's uninsured or underinsured part. And later in this presentation, we're going to get a lot more into detail on insurance and then the relationship between applying for an insurance claim, applying for FEMA assistance, how and when, and all those things. Other Needs Assistance provides financial assistance for necessary expenses and serious needs. Things like replacement of personal property, childcare, medical and dental costs, funeral expenses, other items. Both programs are governed by extensive federal regulations specifying allowable costs, eligibility criteria, things like that. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail further in the presentation also. There are two types of ONA. One is non-SBA dependent and the other is SBA dependent. SBA is the Small Business Administration. And so a lot of times people hear SBA and they're like, well, I'm not a business. Why would I have to do something SBA dependent? I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't own a business. The SBA, even though it's called the Small Business Administration, also offers loans at low interest rates for people who have FEMA applications and who might qualify. And as probably most people on this, attending this know, in New Jersey, our last major disaster was Sandy. So we haven't had a lot of people in the past several years who needed to go through these SBA processes and applications. When Sandy happened, I think there were a lot of people who had concerns about, why am I applying for a loan? I want to be able to get, grant assistance. I don't have money to repay a loan. And we'll talk a little bit more about the maximum aid available under FEMA, but again, FEMA is a supplemental resource. It's not going to cover the full cost of repairs or replacement of an entire damaged home, for example. So SBA loans can come in very handy. Like if a person's home, let's say a person's home was damaged, like completely destroyed, they're not in a flood zone, so they didn't have flood insurance. It flooded, so the homeowner insurance is not going to cover it. A person needs money, they need money to fix their house. And there may be grant programs available from the federal government down the road, but we don't know. It's not here yet. Not everybody wants to wait. So they could apply for an SBA loan. They'll get a really low interest rate to pay for the necessary cost of repairing their home or for other things that may be important. Yeah, Brittany, go ahead and anybody just feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I was going to say, going to a couple of points that you're making here, the SBA loan is a low interest loan. It also operates opposite of how a traditional market loan would work. So some people may say, okay, well, I'm lower income or I have bad credit or something like that. I'm not going to qualify for a loan. That's not necessarily the case with SBA. Of course, you have to show the ability to repay the loan, but they're not going to deny you right off the bat just because you have a lower credit score than someone else may have. It's actually a lender of last resort. And so if you are able to qualify for a home equity loan or some other type of loan to do repairs on your house, whether that be from a credit union or a national bank or something like that, SBA will actually give you a higher interest rate versus someone who is not able to traditionally qualify from a traditional lender like a bank or a credit union. They will get a lower interest rate. So that's something to keep in mind. And then regarding the other needs assistance SBA dependent, it's always good to talk to your clients and just remind them, you don't have to take the loan, right? You're not going to fully recover if you don't, but you don't have to take it. You can decline it. You won't get the personal property or SBA dependent assistance. But if you're really concerned about your house and you don't necessarily think that you need, $100,000 to repair your home, and you think you might get enough from FEMA for housing assistance, you can deny the SBA loan and still get home repair assistance. So when I sit down and talk with clients, I kind of parse through that with them, because for some of my clients taking on additional debt, they might default, and defaulting on a federal loan is hugely problematic down the line. So it's really important to kind of adjust the client's expectations and then really determine what they can. But again, always keeping in mind, FEMA is a supplemental resource. They're not going to recover as well as they could if they did get the loan. But if they're not going to be able to repay it, then maybe that's a bigger concern.
Marianne, I'm sorry, before you continue, I just want to take a break for the first CLE code word. And I also want to respond. A few people have asked whether or not we were going to share the PowerPoint slides. They will be online along with other resources and the recording of this training. For people that work within within New Jersey Legal Services, they will be on lsnjnet.org. And without further ado, the first CLE code word is LAMP. LAMP. Some people like to have a lamp on their desk in their office. LAMP. Okay, thank you, Marianne.
Thanks. Okay, so then moving on to the next one. Yes, okay. So next is talking a little bit about FEMA and, Brian, I just saw you had a thing. Did you want to unmute and add something?
If you could back up one screen, please.
Sure. And please feel free to just unmute anytime you want to say something, because I can't see all the videos and I won't know. So.
Okay. Just to sort of clarify a little bit about the slide here. When a person calls and registers with FEMA, they're registering for the Individuals and Household Program. That's the big umbrella. And then underneath the individual and household programs, you have the two smaller umbrellas. You have the housing assistance, and then you have the other needs assistance. So those two different assistance types fall underneath the program. Just sort of help clarify a little bit of the terminology. And under the housing assistance side, I think as was mentioned, rental assistance, and you said you'd get into it a little bit further, but I just wanted to sort of clarify the little bit of structure that IHP is the big umbrella, housing assistance, and ONA are the smaller umbrellas underneath that one. Just sort of clarify that. And as was mentioned about the SBA, that is a partnership with the SBA has the disaster loans, which that partnership is very critical, and it begins at the actual time that someone registers with FEMA. But that's really all I wanted to add.
Thank you. And then, yeah, if any point, if you think there needs to be more detail, please just feel free to jump in. Okay, so next slide. So yeah, FEMA, who qualifies for assistance. So basically, first, before I even get into that, is anybody can apply for FEMA assistance if they were impacted by a disaster. Generally, FEMA encourages any affected individuals to apply, because depending on their type of status, which we'll get into in a moment, they still may qualify for non-cash assistance. So people who are affected by disasters should apply. On the next slide, we have an update about the extended deadline. The original FEMA application deadline for New Jersey was yesterday, but it was extended by a FEMA press release to December 6th. So there is still time to apply if you talk to people who haven't applied yet. If you were affected by Ida and you still need assistance, there is still time to apply for FEMA. So who qualifies? So US citizens, non-citizen nationals, qualified aliens such as green card holders, asylees, victims of abuse or trafficking, and others, and undocumented citizens or unqualified aliens if they will qualify if another household member is eligible, or if an eligible minor children's parents or guardians, as long as they live in the same household. There are types of statuses that won't qualify, like temporary visa holders, foreign students. One important thing I always have to mention when we talk about undocumented citizens applying, so FEMA has stated in their own public-facing policies that they do not affirmatively go out of their way to report status of any applicants to any other agencies. However, they are under the Department of Homeland Security, and if there is a specific request for the status of a specific applicant, then they may need to provide it. So that is something that I think people need to be aware of, because it may have to be provided. So
Yeah, I think, sorry, man. The one thing I would say about individuals who are living in mixed status households at Trala, it's something we deal with quite a bit. We typically talk with our clients who may be undocumented to really emphasize that if there is an LPR or an individual, a legal permanent resident or a U.S. citizen residing in the household, whether that individual is 1 year old or not, to go ahead and name them as the primary applicant, and then list the maybe the undocumented parent or undocumented guardian as a household member. They will be able to communicate on behalf of the minor child, but that the minor child does qualify, because FEMA benefits don't go for a person, they go for a household. And so it's important. We walk that line. Like I said, it's nerve-wracking. We want to make sure that clients, even though FEMA says that they typically or they generally will not disclose that information, it is still housed. We want to give informed consent to our clients, really inform them what that could possibly mean. In Texas, we have different rules about public benefits and immigration status as well, so that comes up. But minor children are a great way to kind of get around that issue, or another family member or another household member residing in the damaged dwelling at the time of the storm.
Marianne, we have two questions. The first one, somebody asked if the victim designation, for the victim designation, do they need to have an approved application, or is it okay if it's a pending application?
Brian, Oscar, Linda, could you answer that?
It has to be an approved. The pending application does not grant the citizenship. So it has to be an approved. And just as a new information I found just the other day when I was researching an applicant, the green card now is actually and I guess that's more of a older term, because the card I think actually used to have a green banner on it. It now no longer has the green banner, and it's called a permanent residence card. So as you know, just to let you know that if you're researching any documentation or you see anything, that's the new term, permanent residence card.
Thank you, Brian. Also, this one is, I think, more of an observation and a point that somebody wanted to express rather than a question, but I don't know if anybody can also respond to it. So in this scenario, client's car was flooded. She had limited insurance as per saving costs during COVID. FEMA told the client she was not eligible for assistance since the car was leased, so she did not own it and suffered no property loss. That said, she's soon facing a suit from the lessor. So there's no property loss, but there is a liability incurred due to the flooding.
I think what I would tell the client or the individual there, right? I practice in Texas, so I don't know New Jersey law, nor am I pretending like I'm, advocating in New Jersey. But what I would tell an individual here regarding FEMA assistance is I would get a copy of the lease agreement showing that the individual is responsible for the maintenance and repairs of that vehicle, and then get a copy of the insurance declarations page or the insurance policy or the insurance denial. Package those together with a cover letter explaining what the liability and the costs are, as well as a maintenance receipt for the repairs or an estimate for the repairs, and send that into FEMA as a FEMA appeal.
Excellent. And to add to that, our standard operating procedures, we do now look at leased cars. It used to be something that was not addressed, but now it is addressed. And based upon what Brittany was saying, that's very crucial, the actual lease. So thank you for adding that and clarifying that, Brittany.
Thanks. So how to apply for FEMA? How do people apply if they haven't applied yet? So there are a few options. They can call 1-800-621-3362, which is 1-800-621-FEMA. There's also TTY. They can call 7 days a week. They can apply online at disasterassistance.gov. They can go to a FEMA disaster recovery center. I actually didn't talk about this on that slide, but that slide of with the map of the designated counties, FEMA's website, if you just Google it, disaster recovery centers in New Jersey for Ida, there are disaster recovery centers where people can go. FEMA generally encourages people to apply by phone or online, but if they need to go in person, they could do that. Disaster recovery centers are there a little bit more for, as I understand it, kind of hand-holding through the FEMA application process if a person needs to get help submitting, appeal documents, or getting a little more sort of hand-holding through their process. That's what they're there for. But a person could go and apply if they need to. Phone and internet, though, generally are a little bit more accessible for people depending on work schedules and transportation. They can also mail an application or fax, but again, internet and phone are probably the easiest options. And then the deadline to apply, like I said, is Monday, December 6th. It was extended from November 4th. Application deadlines theoretically could be extended again. This extension to December 6th was announced by a FEMA press release that issued on October 27th. So it's just important to monitor probably closer to the 6th to see if there's anything. And obviously, if FEMA staff knows, I think they would probably try to inform people also. And generally, people should apply as soon as possible. Missing the FEMA application deadline is not great. It's not a good idea. People may be able to submit a late application if the person can show some, justifiable reason that there was a delay. But generally, they want to get it in on time and not have to go through that extra hurdle. And then just one other quick time frame thing. So FEMA disaster assistance ends 18 months from the date of the presidentially declared disaster declaration. So for us in New Jersey, that was September 5th. I actually haven't calculated the 18-month deadline. I should have done that, but it's about 18 months from September 5th is when the disaster assistance will end. The president could extend that term, but only if it's like an extraordinary situation. So probably not something to count on. So what happens next for a FEMA applicant after they apply? So FEMA first will begin the loss verification process. And first, they'll verify the losses to determine the applicant's eligibility for IHP assistance. Multiple loss verification methods can be used, including but not limited to the following, and they're not required to do all of these. They could pick one or pick the other. They can do an on-site inspection that's typically scheduled within 2 weeks after the FEMA applicant registers. Due to COVID, inspections are exterior only. I'm going to talk through this slide a little bit, and I think some of the other panelists may have some comments on this, but one of the things we were discussing was, I remember speaking to a client a few weeks ago who said, oh, FEMA came, but they only looked at the outside of my house. I don't even know if it was a real inspection, but it was. And so due to COVID, again, inspections are exterior only, and that's been since last summer. They could do a geospatial inspection, and then documentation of losses. The on-site inspection verifies these bullet points, so the applicant's name, address, contact information, and any insurance policies. The applicant's proof of ownership and occupancy status, collecting any needed signatures, confirming all individuals living in the disaster damaged residence and other information. So that goes back to what Brittany was saying, if the applicant household is based in the child's name, just still going to confirm that everybody in that applicant household includes a child and the parents and siblings. And they're also going to confirm with the applicant all damage that was viewed, and then they will go over with the applicant the next steps in the FEMA process. I just realized I didn't mention this. The IAPPG Individual Assistance Program Policy Guide is updated by FEMA. It's a Brittany, you smiling? Did I get it right? It's a publication by FEMA. It's a really helpful resource. It kind of governs all of these things that matter. That's why it's cited on almost every slide we're going to go through today. And they last had one in 2019, then they updated it in May of this year. And so it's just something to continually refer back to for guidance on these types of issues. With the on-site inspection thing, one of the things we were discussing was, so what happens if a person's like, wait, like I had personal property damage and FEMA's not even looking at it? Oscar, I don't know if you want to talk about this. I know you mentioned that FEMA may just be sort of collecting other paperwork and other information from the person to verify the interior damage.
Yes, that's correct. And at this time, for personal property or interior damage, we are taking the applicant's word for it. And the inspector can generally tell for things like boilers. Well, yeah, New Jersey has a lot of boilers, furnaces, air conditioning. Well, the air conditioning units are outside, but generally, we can tell by the water level. We can see the water level from the outside. We can confirm basically what has happened on the inside of the house. So, and the inspectors have enough experience that they can do this. So you may get people coming or applicants coming in saying that, oh, how could they know what was going on in my house? They didn't go inside. Other than personal property items, I think we have it down pat in terms of the real property.
Mary, I'm
I
sorry.
just want to add on that, after Hurricane Sally here in Florida, FEMA was doing remote inspections, and what we were advising our clients is, when you're going to get the phone call in advance. And so make a list yourself before that call of all of your damage everywhere, every little bit of it, so that you don't miss anything, because people are nervous and worried when FEMA calls. And so it's easy to forget stuff. So make a list of it before and take pictures, because you can send the pictures to FEMA of all of the damage inside and outside your home.
Yeah, elaborating a little bit on what Kathy is saying as well, that list, we usually, when we're talking to clients in our initial intakes and discussing with them their damage, we tell them to go room by room and tell us the home repair damage as well as the personal property. That can then turn around and be used in an appeal as evidence. So if once you get a copy of the FEMA file and you figure out kind of what damage was marked by the inspector as being disaster caused or not, you can then compare that with the list that your client has now made, and then either add in, the I hereby declare under penalty of perjury underneath it and include it as part of an affidavit, or submit it as, evidence of additional damage that was not considered during the inspection. So that list is actually really, really helpful. We've not had as much luck with photos. Photos don't translate well in scanning, and FEMA doesn't have a way to submit appeals via email. They do have an app, but sometimes that's difficult for our clients who don't have access to technology, or maybe are a little bit older and don't really want to go that route, which is totally fine. But the list, that's hard to deny.
Yes, and to add a little bit, just to give you a little bit of basic information on an inspection and for the remote or other type. When they do the phone calls to do the remote inspections, they ask, in discussing, like in a flood event, was the water, up to your ankle? Was it up to your knee? Was it up to your hip? They use layman types methods of determining the damages versus, because when it comes to judging distances, 1 foot, 2 feet, people have a very wide margin of what they view as an interpretation of what but by using body parts, it gives a more general, specific, relatable method of determining some types of damages. But that just gives you an idea of how they have modified the remote inspection also to try to be more.
Also, Brian had added in our chat that March 5th, 2023 is the IHP financial closure end date. And we also have a question. I have a client who is a tenant and whose building was declared a total loss. Is FEMA providing temporary housing for such people?
Generally, generally in those kinds of circumstances, FEMA would give the applicant what 2 months rental assistance, and for the apartment, well, and also they would look at the personal property items.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, if the apartment is in the disaster declared county, there might be a couple of things here. As Oscar was saying, rental assistance usually comes in payments of 2 months, and then they can certify for continued rental assistance up to 18 months after the fact. So that may be an option. I'm not sure, someone from FEMA might be able to speak a little bit about this as to whether the transitional sheltering assistance program is available in New Jersey for IDA, where FEMA direct pays a hotel in which an individual can then basically reside in until they are able to get their FEMA application processed and get financial assistance to get them into a new apartment complex. And then absent FEMA, sometimes Red Cross actually has some long-term housing assistance that's available in these particular circumstances. So you might look to see if your client may qualify for financial assistance from Red Cross in order to pay for longer-term housing.
Yes, at this particular point in time, transitional sheltering assistance is not available in New Jersey, which I almost started to go into that, but then I said, no, it's not something that we're doing right now. It might come in later, but at this point in time, it's not available.
We have a follow-up to that. What if the building is uninhabitable now, but the landlord is intending to repair?
Okay, this is Brian. Now there's a couple of the items. Depending upon how the individual registered, an inspection has to occur, and it doesn't have to be physically, as stated earlier. We don't go inside a building, and in some locations, the multifamily dwelling, apartment complex, whatever, was completely closed and it's fenced off. So there's a safety parameter put around the whole facility. But we still make an inspection. We still meet with the person, maybe outside the fenced area or the zone, but we have to have an inspection. And there's a couple of different things. If one of them is the home repairable, and in this case, they say the person lives on the 5th floor. There's really nothing wrong with their dwelling, but they were forced to relocate. So that forced to relocate is a key factor in receiving the rental assistance. Personally, I've been in contact with multiple property owners and have letters secured that designate that certain properties are completely closed down and all residents were forced to evacuate. So if there's any issues, we've already got the preventive measures in place to help eliminate that issue. And on the, as mentioned, the TSA program has not been approved, but they are using what they call the non-congregant shelter, which is not funded, which is indirectly, I guess you could say, through the public assistance side, funded by FEMA, but it's ran by the state, which the state may get American Red Cross or someone else involved with it. But it's a different program, but it still does house many people. So I hope that sort of adds a little bit of clarity.
One more question. This question is about who can be classified as a victim and what counts as loss. I have tenants in large multi-unit building complex where clearly all the lower floors were flooded and damaged. People on the upper floors were evacuated and displaced as well. The buildings are being remediated and it looks like it will take 6 months to a year, with the tenants not being provided access during remediation. Individuals on the upper floors were denied property assistance by FEMA because their belongings were not damaged. Is there anything that can be done here with FEMA? Do these upper floor tenants not have a quote unquote loss for FEMA purposes?
Kathy might also be able to speak to how this kind of worked in Florida. I think they likely do have a loss if their relocation costs them money. They can be reimbursed for, their evacuation expenses in certain circumstances if they had to relocate and pay a night or two in a hotel before they could get back into their apartment. For those upper floors, they may not have had personal property damage, but they definitely have some losses in a financial loss because of the storm. So if they have applied and they have been denied, if you have copies of those receipts, or maybe they can get a folio from the hotel now after the fact, go ahead and get those, write up a nice cover letter, submit them. They should be reimbursed in most circumstances. Regarding, and this kind of goes back to the question before, for the individuals on the lower floors who are forced to be relocated, as you said, the repairs are going to likely take 6 months to a year. So getting the rental assistance is absolutely crucial at that point. You'll also want to turn to what New Jersey law states on breaking a lease, landlord-tenant issues, those kinds of things. Landlord's duty to repair, those kinds of things. But for FEMA purposes, getting the rental assistance, at least for the first 2 months, just knowing that they have to certify at the end of when their rental assistance starts to run out. That certification process is quite document intensive. So going through that and getting it, but that can, like I said, last up to 18 months. Hopefully it doesn't take 18 months to get that apartment or them to find another apartment for them to be able to reside in. But yeah, unfortunately, that's probably the best way for them to move forward at this point.
And for clients or survivors that are on upper floors of a multi-level facility that's closed down or that had no real loss as far as, I mean, they don't have access to their personal property, but there's no personal property damages. The IHP program does not currently have a program or funding to assist if there's no personal property loss. Now, what we have done with is, we have partnered with several volunteer agencies to help address some of those losses. And, but currently that is what that's the way our program is structured. If you don't have a personal property loss, then we're not able to provide personal property assistance.
We have a couple more, one observation of question. One attendee wrote, my client was an upper floor tenant, but is prohibited from entering the building. The heat, gas, electric, etc. Has been turned off, and she is currently homeless. And then a question, flood insurance does not provide coverage for relocation assistance. If an individual owns property in a flood zone and has flood insurance, can they apply for relocation assistance because they are uninsured for this benefit?
If they've been inspected and the location has disaster-related damages, it's uninhabitable, they may be eligible for rental assistance, even if they are in a flood zone, have flood insurance, or don't have flood insurance. If the home is inhabitable, they may be eligible for rental assistance.
Yeah, and a practice tip here, as if you're going to be helping them with their appeal, it's going to be really important to be very clear about what the coverage for insurance is. So sometimes I've seen or have experienced with clients that when we do submit, or they say they do have flood insurance, then we have to come over the barrier of, okay, but their flood insurance isn't covering this. And sometimes when you submit the policy or the deck page, FEMA just sees flood insurance and moves on, or a different type of insurance and moves on. So getting a really neat, concise, and clear cover letter on top explaining my client has flood insurance does not cover this specific issue. They have an unreimbursable, they have a cost that has not been reimbursed and is not a duplication of benefits for this. They're seeking rental assistance or reimbursement for relocation. Just being very clear, providing a copy of that deck page or the denial for the claim for relocation expenses, some sort of documentation, and then documentation to show that they have that cost. It's going to be really important just to make it very simple on its face.
Yeah, the documents that we need, as far as the FEMA side, is the insurance settlement and the insurance denial letter. Those are the acceptable documents that we need, and, proof of a claim. So that's what we need on our side of it.
Rachel, any more, or should I go on?
No, you can go on.
Okay, thanks. So FEMA, so then what happens when the person gets a FEMA award, and how do they know they get an award? So first, FEMA will send an eligibility notification letter. The applicant should be checking their mail and or checking their disasterassistance.gov account. And then, so if they do get an award, and if they're getting any assistance, financial, money format, they will either get a check in the mail, or FEMA will direct deposit the money into a designated bank account that the applicant already told FEMA they would utilize for that purpose. And FEMA, any FEMA award recipient absolutely has to make sure they keep all receipts for at least 3 years, because the applicant will be monitored and will be subject to audit. The presentation today is not getting into a lot of detail on FEMA recoupments, but FEMA recoupments can happen at really any point. I think there may be a slide where we talk about it a little bit, but there's no real statute of limitations. There sort of is, but it's kind of not really a statute of limitations because it's still subject to FEMA's discretion. People need to keep receipts. And I always recommend for anybody that just take a picture and email it to yourself. That way, if you can't find your paper, or it ends up getting eaten by your dog, or accidentally ends up in the trash, you have those receipts down the road. You can just go back and look in your email, or somewhere that's an electronically stored place. They need to keep receipts. It's critical. Can't stress it strongly enough.
And also to make sure that the money that they receive is spent on what FEMA sent it to them for. So if it was for repair for something, that's the thing you need to spend it for that repair. And
Yeah,
keep
not
it
for
receipt.
buying food. You have to use it for the purpose it was given to you for.
Mhm.
And I mean, they're not gonna literally track dollar for dollar. So if the person got their FEMA check and bought food, but then later did the repairs, I think they can still show that, okay, this amount of money went to repairs. So it's not like that dollar has to be for repairs that day. If the person's starving and they need to eat some food, as long as they spend the allocated amount on repairs and have proof of it, that's really what matters.
Yes, and at times, you might have clients who say, well, okay, what does FEMA really want me to spend it on? Like, is it drywall, or is it studs? The thing about that is, we call that there is a usage, as long as it's used to take care of the household. It doesn't have to be specific to the studs or drywall, nails, or whatever else. So it's called broad usage. And as long as it's, again, as I said, as long as it's being taken care of to get the person's household back to a situation where it's safe, sound, and functional, we can take that.
Yeah, and a couple of aspects here is a lot of people sign up for electronic fund transfers. So they'll get the money, sometimes within days once it's been approved and dispersed. But the letters, they may not, if they're electronic, then they would get a ping to go check their DAC account or the disaster assistance account. But if the mail correspondence, it may be a week or so before, they get the letter that tells them what the funds are for. In past years, there used to be a general paragraph that's been eliminated because of, legal rulings that stated that, as long as these funds were used towards your recovery effort, they were okay. Well, that's been revised where the letters now are very specific that if you receive repair money, it's for repair. But like Oscar said, it's not for a door, sheetrock, or 2x4s or whatever. It's just for the repair. Personal property monies for personal property, rental assistance for rental assistance. The letters are very specific, so it's good to familiarize yourself with the individual letters and that affects those individual clients, because they're a little bit different than they were in the past.
Okay, Marianne, we do have a few more questions now. One question, have you ever seen relocation assistance covered by FEMA when the person has flood insurance? I have not, and most homeowners live with family due to the denial.
I have. Unfortunately, Texas suffers from quite a few floods every year. And so I have seen it happen. It is, like I said, that's why I make the emphasis on being very clear and explaining it out in a very concise way. I have also found that it is much harder once it's been denied after making that argument to kind of overcome that denial. So giving it the best first shot you can and making it clear and concise, having the documents, trying not to supplement the appeal after the fact and just get it in where they have all the documents at once. Those are the cases where they've been nice and pretty and tied away and done. I understand that not every case is like that, and it's still worth giving it a shot. But yeah, and sometimes they do take a little bit longer because you're waiting on the insurance company or NFIP to give you those denials and things like that. So it does take a little bit longer. So I understand, they may be relocated, temporarily displaced with family members during that time. But I have seen it done. I've also seen it not done. So.
Thank you. And another one, if the home is destroyed and the owner does not want to rebuild in the flooded area, are any funds available in any program to purchase a new home, or are the funds only for home or repair?
So from my understanding, and maybe Brian can elaborate, or Oscar, FEMA actually does have a home replacement or rebuild type financial assistance. SBA also does. So if an individual, and I have helped clients successfully get new homes rebuilt through Small Business Administration loans, they're relocation loans, not repair loans. And even though it's relocation, it can be somewhere else. It can also be on the same piece of property and their house was just totaled and they needed to start over. So I know Small Business Administration does. And like I said, I think FEMA does have a program. It's definitely lesser known and also lesser used because I think the circumstances are, or the requirements are a little bit different.
Yes,
Sorry.
there is a replacement program, but specifically to that question, a person does not necessarily have to use those funds to rebuild. That they can use those funds to put them, again, our purpose, our main purpose is in helping individuals to make sure that their household is safe, sound, and functional. So take the money and perhaps move it, put it in another situation to rebuild the house in another. Actually, we would maybe prefer that if we rebuilt in another spot that is not in a flood zone. So again, there's a broad use of funds, and it's about putting your applicant or your client putting themselves in a situation where they feel best, that they feel can best suit and help themselves and their household.
All right, one last question that we have now.
Wait,
I'm sorry.
Brian,
I'm sorry,
I've
Brian.
seen, yeah, did you want to add anything?
Yes, now within FEMA, and I've heard of some different terms here, so I want to be sure that we do some maybe a little clarification. Within FEMA, we have a relocation program, which means a person moves from Texas to New Jersey, or from Puerto Rico to Maine. That is more of what we call a relocation program. The rental assistance is is different, even though some people, I just want to be sure that we have a clear understanding of, of rental assistance moving from one place to another versus the relocation concept. Just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And now on the relocation from a flood zone to not want to repair the home to move outside of a flood zone, if they have flood insurance, the flood insurance also has a cost compliance which has some additional funds available in the flood insurance program that can help with that cost associated with, moving a location or getting outside of the flood zone, or if you wanted to stay there and just raise it. Like I said, it's within part of the flood insurance if a person has flood insurance.
And just to confirm one thing, Oscar, you said New Jersey does not have rental assistance under TSA, correct?
No, New Jersey does not have the TSA program. It has not stood up yet. So
But TSA and rental assistance are two different
right,
programs.
exactly.
So
So
we do have
rental
rental
is-
assistance.
yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
No, I was going to say, from what I understand, New Jersey is approved for rental assistance, but not for transitional sheltering assistance. Transitional sheltering assistance is where you typically would see a disaster survivor relocated into a hotel. And that's usually shorter term, though after Hurricane Harvey and larger events, that might actually be 18 months as well. And rental assistance is 2 months of rent paid at a time. And then you have to continuously recertify that rent has been paid.
And at the same time, if you are in a TSA program, you are not eligible for rental assistance.
And the TSA program was turned down. So it's not a part of the conversation moving forward as far as a program available. And but for information, it is a TSA transfer transitional sheltering assistance. So it's a sheltering program and it's funded through the public assistance side, whereas the rental assistance is funded through the individual assistance side, 403, 408, two different programs.
Okay, there's one last question. Marion, I don't know if you, after the question, if you want to take the break.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, I apologize. There's two more things. The question is, can a renter receive FEMA reimbursement for damaged personal property stored in the garage? Does it matter if the garage was attached to the individual unit or if the garage was located in a freestanding area away from their unit?
Generally, that question is no, because the personal property and the word that you use there is stored. If they're stored somewhere else. I mean, that just tells us that is property that the applicant is not needing, is not using. And so for particularly for the owner, it's necessary expense, serious needs. And so if you got stored, if you're storing something, then apparently it's not necessary and it's not serious.
Correct, essential. It's not if it's stored, it's probably not an essential personal property item.
Okay,
Yeah.
Britt.
As an advocate, yeah, I was just gonna say real quickly, as an advocate, I disagree. There are circumstances where I have seen that approved because people store winter clothes and you may have flooded and now it's getting cold and you need those jackets, you need those warm clothes. I've seen that. Work equipment may be stored in a garage. You may be using that as a temporary work from home place right now because of the pandemic, electronics, things like that. So I think just because it's located in a garage does not necessarily preclude it from getting personal property assistance or it being a serious need or necessary expense. People, have to use garages for many reasons. And it might also be an additional housing space where people have built it out into an additional living room. I do want to clarify, it is much harder to do it if it is detached from the house. And also, in my experience, it is really hard to get home repair assistance approved for repairing garages or affixed structures like that. But regarding other needs assistance, I would disagree with that. I've done many appeals like that.
Okay, one more follow-up question with the garage and then a point that Brittany made that I want to read from the chat. Regarding the storage garage, what about a self-employed person who stores work equipment and then loses everything, tools and work truck?
Yeah, so essential tools are a reimbursable expense under the other needs assistance program. And there's in the individual assistance policy guide, the IAPGA. There's a pretty detailed, comprehensive list of what that can mean. But tools that are used for your work, computer equipment that are used for work clothes like jumpers or jackets that you need to work in a refinery, those kinds of things, those are approved. So yeah, definitely take a look at that list for your client. And if it's work related and it's just being used in that space, I definitely think it's worth asking for.
Okay.
Yes.
And, oh, sorry.
Oh, excuse me. And if it's a, if someone is self-employed, then that's going to be in small business administration. They'll go through that program. It won't qualify for the FEMA other needs assistance program. Although if it is a requirement from an employer and we get the documentation supporting that aspect of it, then it may be covered also through the OWNA program.
But if an individual is denied from SBA, it will be covered. It can be covered. I won't say will. It can be covered from FEMA. So if they personal property is an SBA dependent form of assistance, so they will likely need to get that SBA denial in order to be eligible for FEMA assistance. Another really important thing to flag here is school books, textbooks, school computers. If they are not insured, those are considered essential tools. A lot of people are still schooling from home because of the pandemic, so keep that in mind as well.
Can you repeat the guide that you mentioned? Because somebody did not catch it.
Yeah, so it's the Individuals Assistance Public Policy Guide. Well, now I'm hesitating to read.
The IAPPG thing that's in the sites. Yeah, if you just Google FEMA IAPPG,
Correct.
You'll find it.
Yeah, Individual
exactly
Assistance Program and Policy Guide. There's so
Yeah.
many acronyms in disaster. It's very easy to mix them up.
And
Okay,
it's the one dated May 21st. And if you go to the website, there's also an addendum memo that expands it through the equity program that we're involved with through President Biden's executive order. So just to look at both of those things to be more informed.
Okay, and before we break, I just wanted to mention Brittany's additional point about homeowners replacement assistance. FEMA may provide financial assistance to owners whose primary residences were destroyed as a result of a presidentially declared disaster. HRA or home replacement assistance may be applied toward purchasing a new permanent residence, even if the new residence's cost is greater than the financial housing assistance maximum award. And that's in chapter 3 of the, I'm not going to pretend to know the name of the guide, the IAPPG. And I believe the IAPPG, at least part of it, is part of the resources we're going to be posting online.
Okay, so FEMA, how does someone appeal? What should an applicant or what should an advocate consider before an appeal? So first, if the person's application is denied, they can appeal. You can actually appeal, you can actually appeal any determination. It doesn't have to be a denial specifically. So, but do check that if it is a denial, you want to check the deadline. It would be 60 days from the date of the eligibility notification letter. Again, whether it's a denial or any decision, you have the right to appeal within 60 days of the date on the letter, not the date that the person first saw the letter. You want to assess whether there's merit for an appeal or not. So, people can appeal about eligibility, the amount, rejection of a late application, etc. One of the things we talked about is it's really helpful if you can get a copy of the FEMA file before the appeal is submitted. Brittany and Oscar, I don't know if you guys want to talk about that, but it can take a while to get the FEMA file. So the disasterassistance.gov account is a really helpful resource. I should kind of flag this a little bit. Generally, the disasterassistance.gov account will have copies of letters sent to the applicant from FEMA. It may or may not have everything that the applicant sent to FEMA, but it will have pretty much everything FEMA sent. It won't have a full copy of the person's FEMA file though. That has to be requested from FEMA in writing. And one of the resource materials we have is a file request form that an advocate can use to get the file. But with that deadline, you may or may not get it on time. So regardless, you want to look at, the obvious things you look at on representing any client. Is there a sufficient argument? Is there proof? Is there merit? Typical reasons for rejection of an application might be some of the things we talked about already today, like insurance. There's already insurance coverage for it. An occupancy issue that the person can't confirm they occupied that residence at the time of the disaster as their primary residence. Primary residence has a sort of own definition of what that means. And so one example, after Sandy, we had a client who speaking of this panel of New Jersey and Texas, she was a primary resident of New Jersey, but was often in Texas because she was a flight attendant and she kind of had a separate home, but her primary residence was New Jersey. And then FEMA denied her and some other programs, and we helped her with appeals and those, and she did get approved. So again, it's always important, just because there's denial, just because it looks a certain way, there may be merit, there may be further things to look at. I don't know if Brittany or anybody want to add anything else on this.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask Brittany what your experience is, because a FEMA file, that might take a while for you to get your hands on. There's a couple things that I would suggest. Is first off, if your client feels that they have an appealable item or something they want to appeal, get the appeal in first. Just a letter, or actually we're really looking for one word, and that's appeal. So you get the name, their registration number, and the disaster number, and you say, I, Mary Jones, want to appeal because of blah, blah, blah. And it would be even more helpful if they have something to go with that appeal, like an estimate and or a receipt. So a FEMA file, your client can also come in, because when they put in an application, there's a one-sheet form that has everything that they told us on the application. So you could also use that instead of just waiting for the FEMA file, because that would have everything that we have in our file. So I mean, it could be important, but it's something that I would suggest is important down the line. But right on top of everything, I would suggest that just go ahead and put in an appeal.
And then I think, Kathy, you had also mentioned, like, I think between all of you guys, different timeframes you were seeing, right? And how long it took to get the file.
Yeah, I was also going to say, before we went to that, on the to read the letter carefully, because it can have many reasons for they can approve you for something and deny you for something else. You can also appeal, if you don't think the award was big enough. One of the typical things that we saw in North Florida after our big Hurricane Michael was one of the major reasons for rejection was not caused by disaster. A lot of the homes in our area are older homes. And so I believe there was assumption at that part that there were actual inspections at that time. They weren't remote inspections. Was that had to have been damage that was caused that was already there before the accident. So it's typically a difficult reason to get over. If the client, though, has, again, you may have to rely on pictures or contractor statements, and those contractor statements can't just be your next door neighbor contractor. Needs to be a licensed contractor, and the estimate or statement has to be on their letterhead to get over that not caused by disaster decision by FEMA.
I have a couple more questions.
Yeah, Rachel, I just wanted
sorry.
no, that's okay. I just wanted to address what Oscar was saying, and I think it'll also potentially address the two questions in the chat. Practice tips. FEMA files do take a while. That does not mean they are not absolutely critical in your representation. You just should not blow a deadline because you're waiting on one. So FEMA appeals can be appealed after the 60 days if good cause. I, as an advocate, would just at that point submit the appeal prior to 60 days and then try to supplement it if still waiting on the FEMA file. It depends on what disasters are going on at the time, how many massive disasters are there. That's going to impact how fast FEMA is processing these. But just as an example of some of the information that's critical in a FEMA file, as Oscar was saying, there is that one-page summary that kind of gives you a real good insight of what your client may have put on their application when answering FEMA's questions. But also within the FEMA file are inspection comments. FEMA decision maker comments. It might give you some insight into why they may have denied your client. Maybe it was based on a conversation they had with your client rather than documentation submitted. Sometimes it tells you a breakdown of awards of what appliance may have been damaged that they consider to be repair versus replace, and that maybe gives you an indication of what to appeal there. Sometimes it warns of FEMA recoupment coming down the line. It may have said in a comment somewhere, fraud prevention activated or flagged for fraud or something like that. You may then know, hey, while I'm working on this appeal, let me go ahead and submit the copy of the ID, explain the situations, why these people are the same, and clear it up for your client. So a year and a half down the line, they don't start getting recoupment debt collection letters from FEMA. There's also records of contacts between FEMA and your client. So you might also find, I've seen this happen a handful of times, where my client has told me one thing and FEMA has done another, and I realized that, oh wait, my client may have actually called and said something to the contrary, which resulted in a denial. And they have the best intention. They're just trying to, advocate for themselves. If we can clear that up in a declaration, then we clear it up, and that's much easier than going through a full-blown appeal. And then there is a skeletal inspection report per se in there. It is not as detailed as what the inspectors are putting into their systems and going forth. There's a ton of information in there that's really going to help you preserve and appeal your client's need for assistance. So that's why I think it's really important that, as an advocate, one of the first things we do is when we're getting or we're talking to a client, we have them fill out a third-party authorization form. It allows us to gather information, but also speak on their behalf as advocates. Be forewarned, the FEMA letters, even if you're representing the client, are still going to go to the client. They're not going to get rerouted to the advocate. So you want to keep that in mind. The FEMA file, if you ask them to send it to your law office, they will do that. But the appeal letters or the denial letters or the award letters that you want to appeal, those are still going to your client. That's another reason why the FEMA case file is important. You may not know that there's another letter out there, either prior to the one where your client had been denied or subsequently. You might actually be trying to appeal something that has actually already been resolved and your client just hasn't gotten the letter yet. So those are some things to keep in mind. But yeah, I wouldn't wait. I would, work as best as I can on the information that my client has. I would ask them for every copy of any document they have from FEMA. If you have access to their application online through disasterassistance.gov, great. That's even more helpful. You get real-time information. And then regarding the question about whether you can get the FEMA file application or should you wait for a determination issued, you can request it multiple times. If you're just getting it after they apply, it's not going to have a lot of information in it. You might want to wait until the inspection is done, then request it. But also, after we've submitted appeals, then requested it when that appeal was denied and we really couldn't figure out why, we got another copy of it to see what the new information in there was. And then for clients who apply online, they will still receive a approval or denial letter in the mail. Or again, watch sometimes with like some of your elderly clients, they may have had a grandchild or a child help apply on their behalf online, and they may have actually checked a box to receive electronic notification. I've seen that kind of mess up some clients too. They don't realize that they're actually getting the notices in the online portal versus them getting mailed. So you might just want to kind of talk to your client about how they applied. And you request the FEMA file from FEMA. So you're going to submit it the same way you would do an appeal. It's really like 1 or 2 sentences. Usually what we do is you need to get the third-party authorization in FEMA's records before you can call them and speak to them. So we just kind of 2 birds, 1 stone, send it with a cover letter saying, we represent this individual. We're requesting a copy of their FEMA file enclosed as a copy of their ID, as well as the third-party authorization information, allowing you to disclose this to us. Give that about a week to sit and then start calling about getting information over the phone.
And in the interim, if you're waiting, but you need to get information, I think you can call FEMA with the applicant, and then you'll be able to get the information in the meanwhile. Brian, I saw you wanted to add something.
Right, and the IAPPG it gives a very detailed the requirement or process to request a file. So that's a tool that's out there also to be used to assist with that. And whether a person, I noticed in the chat a little question here, I think, I don't know, somebody wrote it. Whether a person applies by the telephone or online, anybody that applies with FEMA will receive a letter and the packet of their registration intake, and they're asked to review it. And if there's anything, that they disagree with or that's wrong, contact FEMA so that we can have that corrected. So people begin getting notifications to either check their DAC account or a letter in the mail, advising every step of the way. So I just hope that addressed that question.
And I think, Marianne, there might also be a template for a FEMA third-party authorization in some of the supplemental information that'll be posted.
We actually have one officially approved.
Yeah, I was going to say, check that against the IAPCA every couple of months or so, because sometimes there'll be a new requirement or a requirement will change. They'll ask for additional information, or a word is missing or something like that. And that can really slow you up. But there should be a template. And like Brian was saying, there is an official FEMA one as well.
Thanks.
Thanks, Marion. Before you continue, I just want to give the second CLE code word. This is the second CLE code word. It is table, TABLE. My 6-year-old daughter likes to set the table for dinner. Table.
Thanks. Okay, so FEMA had to appeal. So make sure to include necessary information. Kind of, I think what we've been discussing. It's case specific. You can apply online, in person, by mail, or by fax. I'm moving through these a little bit quicker because I have several more slides to go through, but obviously please just jump in if there's anything you want to add. If the appeal is denied, what can somebody do? So can you go file some type of request for a court to review it? And the short answer to that is no. The FEMA appeal decision that FEMA issues on the appeal is considered final and barred from judicial review. Applicants could still try to sue FEMA for other claims like due process, but there are some cases where the plaintiffs lost even on those attempts. Are there other resources if the person needs other assistance and didn't get what they thought they needed from FEMA? Yes, so sorry, it's a typo. Small Business Administration, that'll be corrected in the final version's posted. There's IRS deadline extensions if the person's worried about, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do? I didn't get the FEMA assistance and I have to pay taxes. I'm going to use that, which probably wouldn't have been approved anyway. But all these things that a person is stressed about, that they're conflating and confusing, those things happen. There's mortgage assistance for homeowners. There's a New Jersey specific sort of press release about this, disaster SNAP, nutrition assistance, et cetera, et cetera. What other things should FEMA applicants know? So this is what we mentioned a while ago. There's this cap on ONA and IHA assistance, $36,000 each per household, not per person, per household. Under the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, accessibility related expenses and rental assistance. So sorry, that TSA might be a typo, Oscar, but those are excluded from the respective cap amounts. There is no income limitation to qualify for FEMA assistance. So I think Oscar said this, that a person could be a multimillionaire or they could be very low income. They can both apply for and receive FEMA assistance. I'm guessing the multimillionaire probably has really great insurance, but if they don't, they may need some FEMA help too. What other things should applicants know? Just the relationship between IHP and insurance. I think we've talked about this a lot, sort of conversationally. Oscar, were you going to add something?
Well, just something very, very quick, that the grant money that a person gets is not, cannot be attached to anything else. IRS cannot get it. If a person is on welfare, they cannot touch that. So the grant money is protected against any other encumbrances on it. This is what I really wanted to put out there.
Thank you.
I was going to say that brings up a good point, Oscar, too, as well, because a lot of our clients are lower income. They may be receiving public benefits. This should disaster assistance money, at least from FEMA, should not impact those public benefits or eligibility for those public benefits. So if they, somehow manage to get, the max award of $36,600, that should not be considered an asset or income for the purposes of Social Security or food stamps or anything like that.
Yes, that's very true. And a few times, I should say, there are people that work for the state that are kind of misinformed, and they want to go ahead and try attach that money. And I've had an applicant make sure to tell them again and again that that's not income that can be touched. Also, if the person is worried about their taxes, this is not taxable. Actually, there's forms for the IRS where they can, whatever damages they have can be deductible from their income. But the grant money is not an income. It is not income.
Thanks. And actually, yeah, I was going to say, before these get posted, we'll add another slide with the sites for that stuff too. Thank you. So this is just a little bit of sort of examples, but I'm going to keep moving along just so we can try to stay on time and get through everything. This is what we mentioned a little while ago, sort of other important terminology and the definition of primary residence. Generally, it's where the person is living during the majority portion of the calendar year. And there's according to the IAPBG, even if a person didn't occupy the residence at the time of the disaster, if they were intending to occupy it, like if they just recently purchased the home and had the intention to move in, they might qualify. So that, I think that's probably relevant for a lot of people in New Jersey and our housing market in the last 18 months. The people who just probably, I think, might have just bought the house in late August and then couldn't move in. Other things FEMA applicants should know. So when will FEMA pursue a recoupment? In other words, a demand for return of FEMA assistance. Again, we kind of talked about this, I think, throughout the slides so far, but if they already received money from other sources like insurance, if there's another person living in the same household who received assistance, that can lead to a recoupment. That's actually an important thing to mention. FEMA does not recommend or like more than one application per household. And I know there was I think, Kathy and Brittany, and I guess, FEMA people too, this comes up often, like, especially when you have, a person renting one bedroom in a home and they're a tenant, but the landlord's applying and the tenant's applying as the same address. And, people get misinformation sometimes from different sources about what's the best way to apply for assistance when they're in a household with somebody else, but they're not a family in that sense. And sometimes they can get wrongfully denied and that can lead to other issues. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all.
Well, for us, we've seen that in rural areas where people are living on essentially the same plot of land, but they're different households or maybe different mobile homes on it, but they're all using the same address. So when you get that recoupment notice of a potential debt, it's really important to look at it and see and not ignore it, because that might be the situation when it's because they're saying it's the same household, but they're different households just on the same large piece of land.
And one of the aspects that come up is that if a person is actually, as stated, leasing like a bedroom in the same house as an owner and there's damages, one of the things that we look at is, is there a truly a tenant landlord relationship? Is there some documentation to verify that aspect of it, or is that person actually part of the household? So that's one of the things that we have to look at on our side of it.
Yes, and another iffy sticky thing is, let's say my son is a college student. He lives in a basement. Is he a household? Well, if he has his own access into that basement, as opposed to having to come to my house, he has his own access to that part of the house, then he could be considered his own household. So again, I'm not saying could, yeah. So, but that's that's another point there. And or let's say it's my sister that's lived with her children that's living in the same house, same address, but she has her own access into that. Same thing. It could be she'd have her own household.
There were a few questions and also some responses already. So the first question was, can FEMA grant money be levied on or garnished to pay child support? And the response is that 44 CFR 206.110, federal assistance to individuals and households. There's an exemption from garnishment. All assistance provided under this subpart is exempt from garnishment, seizure, encumbrance, levy, execution, pledge, attachment, release, or waiver. Recipients of rights under this provision may not reassign or transfer the rights. These exemptions do not apply to FEMA recovering assistance fraudulently obtained or misapplied for. And then there was also a note that the Privacy Act requires FEMA to obtain written consent from the applicant in order to share their disaster assistance records with a third party. Applicants who wish to authorize FEMA to share their information with a third party must complete the FEMA form FF 104 FY 21-118. And I believe, Marianne, for the resources that will be going up, we have a list of online resources, so we will add those to that. And then lastly, there's another question. The question is, will you be presenting how to challenge FEMA's valuation of the claim? It is my experience in New Jersey that after Hurricane Floyd, FEMA valued replacement value at 80 cents on the dollar. After Irene, it was 50 cents on the dollar. And after Sandy, 20 cents on the dollar. Valuation was done based upon cost estimates gathered in parts of the country with much lower costs of living. And how do you rebut this?
I would pass that to, I guess, maybe the FEMA staff on the call and how you can address that.
I'm sorry, that one. Yeah, maybe Brian, you can help. You can.
Well, the FEMA contracts a vendor to supply us with the average cost of specific items in each county of a declared event. And through that contract, they provide us the cost of certain items, and that's what's used, in a disaster. And it can vary county to county, state to state, and a lot of that has to do with, the local individual pricing of certain items. So that's where that's where we get our dollar amount from. So I hope that cleared it up a little bit.
And Brian and Oscar and Linda, I remember, I think FEMA generally, when it comes to like replacing things or costs, they're not looking at the value specifically of what the applicant had. They're looking at almost like lowest common denominator item replacement. So if a person lost their really fancy brand new leather sofa, FEMA's not going to look at valuing the replacement of that sofa. They'll value the replacement of a sofa. Is that
right?
That's correct.
That's
very
correct.
basic.
The mid value of what the item could or is. It's just the mid value, not the most expensive, and generally not the cheapest. And actually, Brian, those estimates are made each and every year, not just before a disaster, for each county in the country.
Good.
okay? Thank you. Somebody needs to be muted, I think. Okay, so just some general FEMA tips. I'm going to kind of gonna move along through these if people want to chime in. So tips for successful application. I think a lot of these things we already went through. One major thing to emphasize, which for Ida is a little after the fact, but it's something I think everybody in disaster recovery always talks about, is people should take photos before there's disaster. If they even hear about a storm coming or something like that, take photos of personal property, the home condition, because once it's damaged and once everything's piled up on the curb, there's really a lot of obstacles being able to establish for purposes of FEMA or for insurance what the condition of what the condition was of the item or the property before the storm. So it's just important to do that. And then this is an important thing. The next slide, we'll get into this a little bit more. This was a very robust conversation when we were planning the presentation, but people should apply for FEMA if it's available. They should also apply for insurance if they have insurance. Sometimes people think, oh, I shouldn't apply for insurance. I should just wait to apply for FEMA. That is not correct, because there may not be a FEMA disaster declaration. There may not be a declaration for the county. So they should not be waiting for FEMA to one day come before they apply for insurance. Also, again, FEMA is meant to be sort of the supplement to what's already there. So insurance, if you're insured, that's why you pay for insurance. Insurance should be covering your claims. That being said, don't not apply for FEMA just because you apply for insurance. So if FEMA is available, the important thing is kind of do both, but don't wait for one or the other to do both. And this slide, also from the IAPPG, this thing we keep talking about, but it's disaster assistance sequence of delivery. So it looks at local resources called voluntary agencies, insurance, and then kind of this role of federal assistance as a next step, related at the very beginning. But again, FEMA being supplemental to what's already there, FEMA is inherently not designed to be the first step. But if it is, then apply for it. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add anything on that.
I just wanted to add one practice tip that I've learned over the years of doing this, many appeals and through multiple disasters. When you are initially talking to your client, I think it's really important to ask them, have they had their initial inspection? If yes, were they denied? Have they had a second inspection? And find out where they are in the process on that. Specifically regarding home repair assistance and personal property assistance, we have found it incredibly difficult to win appeals after the second inspection has already occurred. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it seems like the standard is a little bit higher because FEMA has already gone out twice and evaluated their damage and categorized their damage. And if the two inspectors agree that, you know, the damage was not caused by the disaster or whatever their reason for denying it is much harder to overcome the second inspection. So if you can intercept your client's case after the first inspection or before the first inspection, but prior to the second one being done, I think that that's where a lot of great advocacy can be done. You can manage your client's expectations as well as the documents and what's going on. You can tell them how to self-advocate during the inspection. You can prepare tools to help them during the inspection so that they don't get nervous when they're talking to the inspector. They have their ownership documents. And I want to emphasize that that's specifically for home repair and personal property assistance. For ownership, in my experience, regardless of where you are, if you've had the initial inspection or the second inspection, if the reason for denial is ownership, I still think regardless where you're at, you should still appeal that if you can meet the standards. FEMA has recently updated some of their standards through the equity initiative that Brian mentioned earlier. So some of they're accepting a lot more documents as well as affidavits in certain circumstances. But knowing where they're at, inspection 1 or inspection 2 really can play a big difference in the results for your client.
Brittany, somebody had asked, could you address how you appeal FEMA's valuation of a claim?
Yeah, so it depends on what it's for. So what I would generally do for like a home repair assistance is a cover letter, their ID, the third-party authorization. I get a sworn affidavit from my client or a declaration, and at the bottom it's under penalty of perjury. It has the special phrase, I hereby declare under penalty of perjury the foregoing are true and correct. If you don't have that, you're going to have a really hard time with FEMA. So making sure that's in there. I get, I'm over the age of 18. Explain the circumstances in detail about the damage that occurred and why that damage is disaster caused damage. And then, kind of just sum that up in a sworn deck. And then I try to get at least 3 estimates of repair. They need to be on letterhead. I know Kathy mentioned that they need to be licensed. I think that goes to your state requirement. in Texas, we don't have, I mean, we have licensed contractors, but it's not a requirement by law that you be licensed, which is probably a problem, a bigger problem, but another issue to talk about another day. But having it on letterhead, the real important thing there is that the contractor's contact information is readily accessible, and notify the contractor before you submit the appeal that they are likely going to get a call from FEMA to confirm what is in their estimate. It's best if the estimate is itemized, line by line. I know that sometimes that's difficult. Estimates from Home Depot or Lowe's about the cost of repairs, those generally do not work unless maybe it's also supported by an estimate from a contractor with that information. But I try to get a couple of those, and that's what I submit to them on that. For transportation, very similar mechanics estimate, giving them a heads up that they're going to get a phone call to verify those expenses. Personal property is a little bit different. At the beginning, Kathy mentioned room by room itemizing what's going on, what's the damage, a detailed list of personal property in each room is really helpful, but also explaining that room served a purpose. If you have 3 bedrooms and only 2 are occupied, your client should only be getting paid for 2, not 3, even though the personal property damage and the 3rd was also there. So bedrooms occupied, bathrooms, whether they're being used essential or not, living rooms, explain, why that is important that item get covered. But that's really something that I put in my client's affidavit as well as include in the list. The list I do bedroom 1, bedroom 2, occupied, and explain that out. Make it really clear for FEMA.
Yes, and this is Brian, just to sort of support Brittany and to sort of maybe help clarify a little bit on the estimate or the contractor statement. We need to know that it is, the disaster related damages. And the perfect example is if it's, a wind event like it is, in southern Jersey and Gloucester. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. That was more of a wind event than in the north central part of the state where it's a flood event. And so if part of your roof is damaged, FEMA's program will look at the shingles that are damaged, the 1 square shingle or a small amount of shingles, whereas a contractor, they're going to look at an estimate for the whole roof because they want all the shingles to match and everything. I mean, and they're in the business that's what their business is. It's not to patch a little bit because finding the identical shingles is very difficult. So it's not going to look pretty, but that's the difference in the FEMA program and a contractor's estimate. So just to sort of emphasize to show that it has to be specifically the disaster related damages. And as mentioned, yes, verifiable information. Now we don't require them to be licensed, bonded or insured. FEMA does not. We just have to require it's a verifiable, contact information that we can pick up the phone, call somebody and verify that it is disaster related damages and the dollar amount. Those are the primary things that we look at. And as mentioned, it's the occupied bedrooms, a four bedroom house, and there's only a couple living in it, and there happen to be an elderly married couple like me and my wife. We don't use the other bedrooms. So yeah, we would only get funds for one. And it's 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen. It's the essential, safe, sanitary, and functional. So, those are the type of things that it's very basic. And thank you, Brittany, for sort of explaining a lot of that. I hope that helps a little bit from our side of it.
And one last thing, because Brian reminded me, you might try to see if you can get a hold of your state-specific state action plan. It might be called something slightly different, but a version of that. Each state usually produces one every year, or maybe definitely after major events like this. If you go through your state action plan, there is a good chance that there is a itemized list of personal property or line items that can be potentially paid for. And so that's really helpful to use as a resource when interviewing your client. You know, hey, you mentioned your kitchen flooded, or you might have had a power surge. Did you have a toaster? Did you have a microwave? You know, things that you don't really think about because it's $50 here, $40 here. That adds up really fast for an individual. And if it's on a line item and you can prove that it was damaged by the disaster, it adds up. And so you might be able to assist your client if your state action plan or similar document has something like that.
Thanks. So I'm going to kind of skip through these next few. This is more FEMA tips. I actually just noticed a couple of things that people need to be a little clearer before this gets posted with the recording. But a lot of these are things we already talked about. And then finally, and then we're going to skip over to the insurance topic a little bit more. But so anybody, this, part of the reason we're doing this presentation is because FEMA, in conjunction with the ABA-YLD, activated disaster legal services for survivors of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey. Right now, the press release that went out explains that the number to call is LSNJ's hotline, so 888-576-5529. We really encourage people to apply online for services. So if people need legal assistance, they should ideally call this number, and then they'll be placed with someone who can assist them at no cost as long as they're financially eligible. And then actually one other thing I wanted to talk about before we shift gears to insurance was discussing these things with people who are PTSD, who are in shock. People are really in shock. I mean, they lived through a very traumatizing event. And one of the things that's very common in disaster relief is it takes a long time. It's not a quick recovery. I wish I could tell my clients it was going to be over soon. I can't. And especially for Kathy and Brittany, dealing with these types of things way more often than we have in New Jersey. They're having these really tough conversations with people all the time, while they themselves may be living through their own trauma, their own effects of being impacted, then trying to also help somebody get through it. And I wanted to hear particularly from them, and then if the FEMA staff too, because you guys are getting those calls, any general tips on how to have these tough conversations, telling somebody, yeah, you may not ever be able to move back into your house. And even if you can, it might not be 5 or 6 years from now, if that.
Well, generally, when I've seen this, it's shock. Folks will go into shock, and generally what I do is I tell them, it's taken you 10, 20, 30 years to get the things that you have, and it's gone on and almost over, almost 5 minutes. The thing is to not look at the whole picture right now, because you look at the whole thing, all you do is you just see a big mess. The thing to do is just get a brick and use that brick. This is what I can start with to rebuild, one piece at a time. You do it one, because if they get to try to want to do it all at once, that can be, and it will be overwhelming. It's just one piece at a time. This is what can you do right now? And once you do that, then let's take a look at what you can do next.
I would say for practice tips for advocates when working with disaster survivors, there are plenty of trainings out there on being trauma informed and learning how to work with clients. A lot of those may center around individuals who suffer from or have experienced domestic violence. A lot of the concepts apply here as well with disaster survivors, especially when you're talking about an individual who may have lost their home, their personal property, their car, their job. They are living in a shelter. A lot of those things, think about what you would be looking for. You're looking for food, you're looking for safety, you're looking for, a way to protect your family and a way to maybe get medicine or things like that. So those initial needs for survival, those are their concerns. What you can do as an advocate is start working on their legal problems so that when they can resolve the initial critical needs for themselves, they can then focus on the legal issue with you. But in the first couple of weeks, they're not going to be thinking about FEMA appeals. They're not thinking about suing their contractor or their insurance. They're just processing. I think that's really important when working with disaster survivors. You have to kind of lower your expectations on they're going to be providing you documents, the same week you ask for them. That's why it's really important when you're interviewing them at first to kind of give them a written list of what you're looking for. Because if you're telling them over the phone, they're also probably doing multiple things at once, or they're just really overwhelmed. So just kind of have some best practices for your office or for you as an advocate, and watch a lot of trauma-informed trainings for attorneys working with individuals. And there's several out there nationally on working with disaster survivors specifically, and then also protect yourself as an advocate from any vicarious or secondary trauma that you might experience after working with this client population for a while.
Yeah, I would just agree with everything Brittany and Oscar said, and to tamp down your client's expectations that FEMA is going to solve all their problems, because that's not going to happen. For many of our clients, for Hurricane Michael, they still have tarps on their roof because we have a lot of problems with people at that time being able to prove that they were the owner of their property because they were living in air property. And so I think we have to be really honest about how long disaster recovery takes. It's not months, it's multiple years, but also to make sure they understand that it can be sped up by adhering to the deadlines, and by us, as Brittany said, letting them know what all they need together and getting that stuff together and responding quickly. But it's astounding to me, even now, after all these years, how long it takes to recover from a weather disaster that we experience in North Florida.
What year was Hurricane Michael?
2018. So we just passed our 3-year anniversary, and
People still have tarps, yeah.
We still have tarps, and we just received an 2 years after, little over 2 years after the disaster, the CDBG DR money, which everyone thought was going to make a huge difference, but it's very difficult to qualify for that money for many of our clients.
Marianne, we don't have any questions right now, but it is 12:04, and I know we had a scheduled break at 12, being that I think we're a little behind on the presentation, and we're ending at 12:35. I don't know if you want to.
Do we need to take a break? Is it required for CLE stuff?
No, it's not. And if anybody needs to take a break, a minute or two, that's fine. Obviously, that's fine.
Yeah, maybe, so just out of like consideration for the panelists, maybe we'll just like a 2-minute break, and I'll just stay here, and then we can start back in a couple minutes.
That's fine. So it's 12:04. Do you want to break until 12:10 then? 6 minutes?
We have a lot more slides to get through, so
okay.
So I'll just be here when you guys are ready to go. Does anybody need a break? Okay, I'm seeing no, so maybe we'll just keep going.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're welcome.
All right, so this was the end of the FEMA part, and then now we're kind of moving over to the insurance. It looks a little repetitive because actually the two presentations were merged, but so we're going to talk now a little bit more about insurance, just to give sort of a background on what it is, and going over these topics like homeowners insurance, renters insurance, flood insurance. I actually got an email this morning, it was sent to Rachel, our training person, forwarded to me. Somebody asked about federal funding for hurricane insurance, which I think the person may have been referring to federal funding for flood insurance, and then perhaps conflating terms. But so that's not something we're covering, because it's not something I think specifically that exists unless there's like newer types of carrier coverage. But so these are the main forms we'll be talking about, and how can a policy be terminated, and preventing loss and things like that. So where does somebody find their homeowner insurance policy? How do they find out if they're insured? They should obtain a copy from the insurance company. The declarations page is very important. It contains their name, indicates who the lender is if they took out a mortgage. If they have a mortgage on the property and they have insurance, that mortgage company is going to be named on there. And in most cases, any insurance proceeds released from the insurance company are going to be sent on a check that is payable to the mortgage company and the insured. who's the client. And usually if that client tries to get the insurance company to sign it and send it to them to deposit, it's not going to happen. The insurance company is going to send it back and say, no, you need to sign it in most cases. And they're going to say, well, we'll hold it in escrow and then we'll release the funds when you have, valid contractor estimates and the contractor submitted their W-2s and we have the proof that this is a real person doing the work. So that's why the mortgage companies are generally going to be listed in there. After Sandy, we did see a handful of cases where the mortgage companies didn't do that. It was uncommon, but in those cases, sadly, a lot of those people got that money up front and then paid terrible people who are scam contractors and storm chasers and then didn't have the money they need to fix their house. So people often get annoyed by the mortgage company process. I feel from a 30,000 foot view, it kind of protects them. It's going to also have the coverage, everybody involved in or named in the policy, when the policy began and when it expired. Generally, homeowners insurance covers dwelling, structure, the house, personal property, in most cases, liability protections, guest medical protections, other structures, additional living expenses. And I mean, the major thing I have to probably just say is for any insurance policy, this is in general, this is for any lawyers on this call, this is, contracts. It's so specific to the policy. It's so specific to the language. So please do not take any of this as like be all end all, because it's very specific to your client's specific policy. Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a comment because I think it's relevant to this section. That there was a comment that it can be very difficult for people in arrears with their mortgages to get the funds released in that person's experience.
So that is true. Generally, it's fact specific, and the person generally is going to need to show, look, I have a contractor who can do these repairs, and then the funds may or may not be released. If they're not released still and the person needs to get the repairs done, I would definitely look at, maybe disputing that further with the mortgage company. I don't know, litigation needs to be pursued or some type of action to get the funds released. The mortgage company, most mortgage policies, again, these are all broad generalizations, but most mortgage policies give the mortgage company the right to apply the funds to the unpaid balance if the property is not repaired. So the mortgage company shouldn't be preventing the person from being able to repair the property. But sometimes I think that's their starting point, and that's not really right. I don't know, Kathy or Brittany, if you have any other thoughts on that or what you guys have seen. Okay, and actually, I remember one of the things we talked about the planning call was they don't have these issues, I guess, that often in their respective states for whatever reason. I guess like people don't have mortgages or just don't have those issues. So maybe it's New Jersey. But yeah, thank you, Rachel. And then what's not covered. So this is, pretty much any insurance policy is going to always exclude pre-existing damage. That's kind of what Kathy was talking about with those Florida cases where, it was FEMA, but it's a similar principle where FEMA was like, look, this damage to your very old home wasn't caused by this disaster. Like those things were already deteriorating prior. But so that's FEMA, but these principles apply really across the board. People are always going to try to deny things that they perceive as pre-existing damage or wear and tear, poor maintenance, things like that. So yeah, if building codes have been upgraded and now the person has to do upgrades, the policy may or may not cover it. Again, these is generalizations from very general resources about homeowner insurance in New Jersey from all states specifically. Those links that are on the bottom of the slide, but you have to look at your policy for your client because it may cover different things. So that's sort of an overview of homeowner insurance really broadly. And then this is just another graphic from the same website that's just in case things are easier to understand visually. And then how to file a homeowner's insurance claim. So this information comes from our state, New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance. They have a lot of resources on policies for homeowners and what people should do when there's homeowner insurance issues. So it's going to be, again, policy dependent. If there's theft, that should be reported to the police. So I recall after Sandy, and I would imagine the same thing happens in Florida and Texas, like disaster happens, some things are destroyed. There may be people who are like, oh, I'm going to go take some like raw materials from that property. Nobody's there. I can go sell these. So that's not a result of the disaster. That's a result of theft. It's a different thing. Claims should be filed like ASAP, immediately. I recently heard about somebody whose insurance company, the person was basically trying to remediate and handle the issue. So they filed the claim maybe a few weeks later, and the insurance company was like, oh, well, why'd you wait so long? It's like, well, I didn't know it was going to be this bad. So they're always sort of looking at things like that. It doesn't mean the person won't be able to, recover on their claim, but sooner is always better. Make urgent temporary repairs. Homeowner insurance often will, depending again on the policy, it often will cover additional living expenses for uninhabitable homes. Additional living expenses, again, policy dependent. It has to be that the type of damage is a covered loss to trigger the additional living expenses. So sometimes that means, okay, it means like if the person can't live in the house, the additional living expenses coverage may cover their cost for a hotel. Again, very policy specific. They should, compile the list of damaged items and be able to support the claim with that evidence. So just gathering everything they would need. How to file home insurance claims is just a little bit more. So then replacement cost coverage, if that's in the policy, that may require purchasing replacements before getting the refund, or it may require, proof of the invoice, and then they'll send the money. But that's, again, policy specific. Generally, when a person files the claim, a designated claim adjuster will be sent by the insurance company to adjust the claim. Public claim adjusters. So this is just sort of an aside, and I think Kathy also may have some comments on this. So there's public claim adjusters that there's sort of like a private market of people who adjust claims. They're separate from who the insurance company would send. And many people who were in New Jersey after Sandy may recall a lot of our clients had these people just showing up at their houses, offering to help them through an insurance dispute that hadn't even happened yet, and had these people signing contracts agreeing that, okay, in exchange for adjusting my insurance claim, you will get 30% of my insurance proceeds. And I agree that the insurance company is going to send a check to you first, and then you'll send me the difference. And there are some good ones. I think Kathy will talk about that more. And there are some very reputable ones, even in the New Jersey, New York area. But those aren't the ones we hear about. Obviously, the ones we hear about are the people who don't do anything. They either show up, sign this paper, disappear, and then send the person a check for 70% of what their claim was. Or maybe they take one picture, one photo, and still, I don't think that warrants 30% of the claim. That's just my view. I don't think anybody would think that. And what's also really troubling about that is, so if the person files their insurance claim and they believe more money is needed, they can just follow up with their insurance company, and the insurance company can send out an adjuster to do a second inspection. There's no automatic need to retain somebody who's taking a percentage of the cost before the claim's even filed. So again, there are some who do real work and they are good and they add value, but there are also a lot of scammers. Kathy, I don't know if you want to, because I know you talked about this a little bit also.
I could just add what you said. After our major hurricanes, the public adjusters do show up on site and knock on doors. In Florida, there's a public adjuster statute, and they're supposed to be licensed. And so community education about public adjusters before a storm is a really good idea if you have that licensing requirement. The other thing is, just because they're licensed doesn't mean they're a great public adjuster. And so you should be getting references, and that's what we tell our clients, to get 2 or 3 references of people's claims that they've adjusted. Also in Florida, I don't know about other states, there's a top fee that they can charge after a disaster. So the top amount after a disaster is 10%. They can take a 10% fee from your claim. So you have to figure that in. And a lot of people jump to the public adjuster because for some reason they think it will be, and it may be, quicker. They think it'll be quicker to get their insurance money. And of course, that's not always the case, but there are, they're all over. They're all over after a disaster trying to get the, to get you to do the public adjusting. In Florida, they limit the time they can come. And as I said, they limit the fee. But people just need to make sure they're licensed and that they've done that before. So they, have some experience being an adjuster.
Yeah, thank you. We do actually have a public adjuster licensing statute in New Jersey. I'll definitely add a few things to these slides before they're posted. But like you said, just because they're licensed doesn't mean they're doing a great job. I haven't looked at that. When I add the slide updates, I'll put a little bit more content. I recall after Sandy, I think, and I just don't remember if it was New York, New Jersey, one of our states did have a cap and the other didn't. But there may have been several updates in the past several years that I just haven't looked at. So I'll make sure that's on the updated slides.
Yeah, and of course there's the cap, but the homeowner could negotiate to get less than the cap. And there might be an adjuster who'd be willing to do that to get the work. So just because they can charge 10% doesn't mean they have to charge 10%.
That's a good point. Thank you. And then so settlement offer. So yeah, the insurance company will send an offer on the claim. There may be ability to dispute it and request additional money. Rachel, do you need to?
Mary, yeah, I just want to give the last CLE code.
Sure.
The third and final code is CHIR, CHIR. One of the most important things when I worked remotely for a year and a half was to have a comfortable chair.
Thanks. Okay, so how to appeal a homeowner insurance decision. So you see there's several sites on this slide. It's mostly from the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance website, also the National Consumer Law Center's electronic library. Generally, the appeal needs to be in writing, and, including the name, the homeowner insurance policy number, the date of the loss, the damage that occurred, policy dependent, specific. So refer to the policy for the appeal timeframe, for the process, for the address it needs to go to, for any other specific requirements. And missing even a minor requirement could be fatal to the appeal. There's state statute that requires companies to enforce the internal appeal process. The denial letter that the person's appealing, or the decision letter, should indicate the appeal timeframe. So make sure you obtain that letter and look at it. But again, also refer to the policy. There may be some inconsistency. If there's an inconsistency, I think you would use the one that's probably more favorable for the client, because if there's a conflicting information in their own process for what they're telling the person they can use to appeal, that's an issue, but it does happen sometimes. You may want to err on the side of going by the stricter deadline, but it does happen. We've seen that a handful of times. Then if there's a person who's unsatisfied with the appeal decision, they can request investigation through the NJDOB and through the ombudsman. Obviously, people should work with attorneys at that stage. Usually there's going to be a better outcome at that point. If it still doesn't work out, if the person wants to file a lawsuit, there may be time constraints listed in the policy. Most will give a 1 to 2 year window. In the absence of express provisions, a person might be able to argue 6 years under state law. Other information, so tips on how to prevent loss. These are kind of general things, installing detectors, ensuring the policy is kept, paying premiums to prevent coverage cancellations. Can a policy be terminated? Yes. It can be terminated within 60 days of the person becoming a policyholder for lawful reasons. It can also be terminated for depending on the policy and what the policy lists as reasons for potential termination. It could be terminated for other reasons. So we had a Sandy case a few years ago that one of my colleagues handled. The person's policy was, they received a policy termination notice because of alleged unrepaired Sandy damages. It was something very vague, and it really wasn't accurate. The person was in the process of trying to get the repairs done. There may have been an inspector that came out. We didn't see a lot of these, but I remember, this case specifically that my colleague worked on. The letter did set forth, the process for disputing the threatened termination. I think we submitted the dispute not only to them directly, to the insurance company, but we also filed the dispute with Dobie and as a complaint. And within 24 hours, the person got a letter like, oh, we take it back, you're fine. So it's important that if people get those letters, they should be definitely reaching out to an attorney, because if they haven't responded, then they might have lost their insurance coverage. And although it wouldn't have necessarily impacted them for the disaster that was under the coverage, it would impact them if something else happened. Renters insurance, similar, where does a person get a copy? So a lot of people, as we know, in all disasters end up tenants and homeowners, right? So a lot of people end up being tenants with renters insurance issues. And again, same thing, declaration page, request a copy from the insurance company if the insured doesn't have a copy. Again, generalizations of what's covered and what's not covered. Policy dependent, but generally damaged by fire, lightning, explosions, vandalism, theft, sudden accidental water damage, weight of ice, snow, or sleet. Generally, natural disasters like earthquakes and flooding are excluded from these policies, but specialized policies might be available for these events. Again, always review the policy documents and the contract to be certain. We had a renter's insurance case. I think we'll put it up like a template of the appeal we filed for this client. The person lived on a second floor in a property that was flooded, and the water line, they were denied because when their insurance company did the inspection, the water line only showed like a certain, I guess, line on the outside of the house. But the person had stuff that was damaged by the water that was like lower laying, and then they had proof of that. So we did the appeal for them, and sort of like, I think like Brittany and Kathy have talked about for FEMA appeals. I mean, for any appeal, if you want to document it and you want to make it as easy as possible for the person reviewing the appeal to quickly understand why your client does need the relief that they're requesting. So do like, a clear, concise statement, like Brittany said, and then we always do a sheet that kind of summarizes everything. Like, we'll have all the exhibits, but there's an exhibit sheet. Like, this is all they need to look at. You calculate the dollar amounts on there, so they can look at it, they can refer to whatever they need to. And then that person ended up getting the proper insurance coverage they needed, which was a nice amount of money, somewhere close to about $20,000. Okay, it's about 1223. So I'm just gonna kind of skim through these, more about renters insurance, how to file a claim, refer to the policy. Flood insurance, this one is federal. So homeowners insurance is state, flood insurance is federal. Kathy, Brittany have definitely had experience with the NFIP. National flood insurance policy is program. It's basically is the federal program for flood insurance in the United States. And most people have flood insurance through NFIP, some don't. These slides are going to apply to people who have NFIP coverage. Almost everybody who has flood insurance has it through the NFIP. It doesn't matter if they got it through Allstate, State Farm, like any of the insurers, it's still an NFIP policy. And when it comes to shopping around for a better price, that doesn't exist with most flood insurance, because if it's an NFIP policy, those rates are set by specific categories depending on the categorization of the property, whether it's in a flood zone, things like that. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to say something. So you put your hand up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is Brian. Now there is some flood insurance that is what we call third-party flood insurance, which is not through the NFIP. And so I just want to be sure that we're aware of that. And what happens at sometimes is, say that property is required to have flood insurance, and they don't have the national, insurance through the national flood insurance policy. Our computerized handshake process would say, okay, they're not compliant with having that flood insurance requirement, where in fact they may be through a third-party insurer. For instance, Lloyd's of London. I have a property that is through Lloyd's of London, and it is not an NFIP policy. So, I mean, that's just an example. So I just want to, be sure that, there are all alternatives to the National Flood Insurance program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And so, yeah, so I did try to highlight that on the slide, but I think we can't emphasize it enough.
There is a question. Have you found umbrella insurance to be a helpful tool in covering any of the exclusion from homeowners, or does it have similar exclusions?
Kathy's shaking her head no.
Yeah, they're totally two different types of programs, if homeowners insurance would exclude, flood events, earthquakes, volcanoes, and the homeowners policy, the flood policy would not exclude. Matter of fact, the homeowners policy for flood, or the flood insurance policy, also covers inundation of floodwaters from lakes, rivers, and also mudslides. So it specifies, and that policy is a standard policy, which is accessible through the .gov. And so I'll see if I can locate that also.
Thank you. So again, just general facts about flood insurance. Again, with the disclaimer and strong reminder, as Brian just reminded us again, that this is about NFIP. This is not for those other non-NFIP flood insurance policies. NFIP has a statutory maximum coverage of $250,000 for property damage and $100,000 for personal belongings. Homeowners can buy excess flood insurance. So if their home is worth more than $250,000, as many homes in New Jersey are, not all, but a lot are, they can buy excess insurance. And that's when you have those companies like Lloyd's of London. And there are a couple of other common names that you'll hear about offering what's called excess or surplus lines insurance. And again, this is the sites for this information at the bottom of the slides. This is a current flood map. Well, not current, actually, sorry, 2014. This is a flood map of New Jersey. It was just based on repetitive flood claims. So these are areas that had repetitive flood claims. I think the shore makes sense. And then you have these other kind of pockets throughout the state. So people who are in high risk flood areas generally will be required to have flood insurance. How do they price? So a number of factors go into it. Flood risk, floodsmart.gov, by the way, so, .gov. This is basically like the public facing, really easy to read, easy to understand website that the federal government created for the NFIP program. Because again, overwhelming majority of people in this entire country and our territories and all that, if they have flood insurance, it's probably NFIP. So this is where a lot of this information is from. It's, so factors include the flood risk, like I was saying, the flood zone, type of coverage, is it building, is it contents, the deductible, the amount of building contents coverage, location of the structure, design and age of the structure, and then location of the contents. And generally with flood insurance, if there's like what's considered mitigation, hazard mitigation, if the property is elevated or person's done things to make it less prone to a strong claim from flood damage, they'll have to. And that's it. I mean, literally this website's why am I paying this amount? So go ahead.
One more question. Not living in flood zone, but ended up with no flood insurance. What is the recourse for those homeowners who are not required to buy flood insurance? Incurred Ida related damage, flood remnants damage other than FEMA. What is the advice for them moving forward?
It's SBA, FEMA or SBA or nonprofit organizations in the region. So you might find some NGOs or some voluntary organizations after a disaster, or community organizations after a disaster. Religious organizations, volunteer organizations often play a large part in disaster recovery as well. But your big ones are going to be FEMA and SBA if you don't have insurance.
Yeah, and that's the reality for a lot of the people who were affected by Ida. They weren't in flood zones. They didn't have the insurance. They're going to have to get those loans, or play the waiting game, like Kathy mentioned. If CDBG-DR federal allocation becomes available for New Jersey, there may be grant programs. People may not qualify, and why I can stress again the importance of applying for FEMA before December 6th. If CDBG-DR state funding becomes available, grants to help people, if they do not have a FEMA application number, I can almost guarantee you they will not qualify for that assistance. Because guess what? 2-3 years down the road, how in the world is anybody supposed to confirm that this person was affected by Ida years ago? They're going to rely on a FEMA registration number, an application number. So people should apply even if they're not 100% certain they need something. Like Brittany said, if they get relief that they don't need, they can return it. They can say, no, thank you. But that registration number may be, really, really important for them. How to file a flood insurance claim. Again, so these are things generally available. It's, it's in the policy, inform the insurance carrier, and then create a list of damages, things like that. how to appeal a flood insurance claim. So a lot of this is from FEMA and floodsmart.gov. There's a proof of loss form that has to be submitted within 60 days after the incident. If they're appealing, deadline might be extended in circumstances of extreme flooding. Include a copy of the denial letter. No payments required for an appeal. Third-party representation isn't necessary, but could be very helpful. So NFIPs under SFIP, they're kind of connected. The standard flood insurance policy is what most people have because NFIP also. And if they want to request an appraisal, one of the options is that, as you can see on this graphic, they can seek an appraisal. But if the person requests an appraisal to dispute the claim coverage, they cannot later do an appeal. So they either get another appraisal or they appeal it. Anti-concurrent causation clauses, this probably won't be a huge thing because, well, they come up, I guess, if people are filing homeowner insurance claims for flood damage. Basically, it protects insurers when two different incidents occur within close proximity, but only one's covered by the insurance policy. They're always going to be, at least in the homeowners and the policies, talking about the fact that if your damage was caused by another cause or another thing that we don't cover, our policy is not going to cover the claim. How you have to assess and review the specifics of an insurance decision to assess merit for an appeal. Again, kind of all the things we've been talking about, it's policy specific. You have to review the coverage. There's exclusions in the policy. There may be riders. You'll see the riders listed on the declaration page. Oftentimes clients don't have a copy of the riders and they'll be like, what riders? And I'm like, you have a rider because I know because it's listed on the deck page. They don't have it. So then they don't have it. They don't know where it is. So then you just have to probably request it or help them request it from the insurance company so that you can do like a thorough review of what's really available to them, addendums, any related coverage documents. Then if you think the claim was denied or improperly underpaid, you would send a written appeal to the insurance company within the prescribed time frame. And your appeal, like Brittany was talking about for the FEMA appeals, you want to point clear and concise, point the insurer to the part of the policy that covers it and why their decision was wrong. So if they're saying, oh, it was excluded for this reason, then you want to say, no, the exclusion says this, but this is what happened. This is not excluded. This is actually covered. General issues, disagreement about money. People often think the insurer is underpaying the claim, so evidence of actual costs of repairs or work may be valuable. Knowing what the insurance policy does and doesn't cover, being absolutely careful about complying with relevant deadlines. Like we said before, missed deadlines can be automatically fatal. And again, this thing about, damage or loss may not be covered. Homeowner insurance wouldn't cover floodwater damage. It may be an accurate denial. And then other resources are NGA Department of Banking Insurance. United Policyholders is a great nonprofit that provides a lot of really, really helpful resources for consumers and advocates relating to insurance issues. They talk about stuff federal level. They also have a page for every state, and it's a really, really wonderful resource. And then there's also this group, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. I haven't had any experience with them or heard much about them, but they do apparently exist for the purpose of also providing support to people with these types of issues. So I know we kind of skimmed over the insurance stuff. If anybody wants to talk any further about any of this insurance stuff or FEMA things or other points that you think are important or questions you saw coming in, we can do that now.
I just want to make 2 quick points. Insurance requirements are different for SBA loans. SBA will, in certain circumstances, mandate that disaster survivors acquire insurance, particularly flood insurance, as well as has all hazards insurance, like a homeowner's insurance policy or something along the lines of that. So if you are working with a client who is working through an SBA loan, those are additional costs that should be considered, is whether or not they're going to have to pay to have the property insured and for how long. Another thing, which I don't know specifically a problem in New Jersey yet, is if when getting FEMA letters, depending on how the flood mapping and issues and like that are going in New Jersey, reading to make sure at the bottom of the homeowner's home repair approval letters of the FEMA approval letters, that there's not also a small paragraph at the bottom of the letter stating that if you accept these home repair funds, a group flood insurance policy will be issued for you for 3 years. It's great to have the group flood insurance policy for 3 years. In the case of repeat flooding, you're covered, you have that. But also know that GFIP policies run with the land. And so that piece of property will be tied to that insurance requirement forever. All right, until Congress decides to remove that requirement, that policy will run with the land. And so if an individual fails to renew their policy because of costs, they may be precluded from future disaster assistance.
Brian may be getting ready to talk about this, but you just reminded me to mention the importance of the fact that if people get FEMA assistance, they may be required to get flood insurance. And if they don't, and there's a subsequent disaster, they don't get covered. And I know this came up on our planning call also so let's say somebody applied for IDA and didn't have insurance that they were required to have, that could mean they don't qualify for certain FEMA assistance or other forms of assistance. But if they later get the flood insurance or meet the requirement, they might qualify for assistance at the next disaster.
Well,
But Brian, go ahead.
they would only be required for the flood insurance if they are in the special flood hazard their area. If they're not in that, then the requirement for flood insurance is not on them. Also, I'd like to point out too that throughout the country throughout the areas that I have served in, it sometimes can be difficult for people to get flood insurance if they are not in a flood zone. And I found that it's not because of any thing that's against the insurance policy. It's generally because the insurance brokers, they're not aware of how to put together a flood insurance policy outside of a flood zone, or they don't want to, because I understand there's not that much of a payoff with them if they do that. So the cautionary here is, if you have a client that wants to get flood insurance and he or she is saying that their insurance person is saying that they can't get insurance, that's not true. They can get and they can apply for flood insurance, even if they are outside of the flood zone.
And this is Brian. I'd like to add that if a person is a renter and they were impacted by a flood and they're in a flood zone and they received assistance, for instance, someone that's in an apartment complex, like we discussed earlier, if they move back into the exact same unit, then that flood insurance requirement is placed on them in that unit. You know, if they move to a different location and they're still a renter, then that requirement's not placed on them. The only time it impacts renters is if they move back into the exact same physical location, whereas owners, it stays with the property. So that's just a little bit of difference within how FEMA works. And the flood insurance requirement could be placed on them, not just by FEMA, it could be placed on them by any federal entity. For example, if you receive maybe don't get a FEMA assistance, but you do SBA, and the SBA may place that flood insurance requirement on you, or USDA, or any federal financial institution, or may place that requirement on you. And then in the National Flood Insurance Database, it'll reflect, when and who placed that requirement on that piece of property.
There were a handful. Oh, Kelly, did you need to say something? There were a handful of questions that came in there.
Yeah, I was just going to let you know that you have 3 questions.
I'll go through them. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
So the first one is someone asked if FEMA awards are public record, and if they are public record, are they published anywhere, or do they need to be requested under FOIA?
For individual awards, they're not published online. I'm not sure about whether or not you can get individual persons' information based on a Freedom of Information Act request. I think the Privacy Act is going to apply in those circumstances. That being said, for broad numbers, you can go to the FEMA.gov for disaster 4614, which is for New Jersey. You can see an overview of the approval rates, the amounts, and the number of applicants that have been approved. That being said, non-governmental organizations, as well as VOADs and COADs, different case management organizations, may actually be able to get access to individual information in order to prevent duplication of benefits moving forward. And SBA information can be FOIA'd if you're representing a client on an individual application. But again, if you're going to FOIA it, it's going to be broad general stroke numbers.
Thank you. And then the next is sort of a combination of questions and comments. So I'm just going to try to combine them. So this person is asking, if a contractor begins work before a FEMA rep does the inspection, will that nullify the FEMA claim even if the person has photos of the damage and evidence of the damage that was there before the contractor began repair work? And then there's sort of some, go ahead, sorry.
No, well, that's absolutely not the case. What we really encourage people to do is to start cleaning up, start repairing as soon as possible, as soon as you can, even before an inspector comes out from FEMA to take a look at the damages. Again, our contractors are skilled enough to tell what is new, what has been repaired, and what is still needs to be fixed, and what was damaged due to the disaster. So yeah, that was somewhere in the work. Somewhere I wanted to kind of sneak this in is that we want the people to not sit and wait for FEMA to come to take a look at them. We want them to get up and to do something, to start repairing as soon as possible, as soon as they can. Again, there's that, take that brick and do not wait for us to come out to see whether or not the inspector can say, well, this was damaged and this was not.
Yeah, some practice tips here. Mitigation of damages for FEMA as well as insurance is going to be something you're going to want to tell your client to do. Mold mitigation, et cetera. That being said, they need to keep very detailed notes, receipts, invoices, photos, anything you can think of to be able to show and prove that damage or appeal the inspector's determination as to whether or not something was damaged before or after, because things happen. The other thing I will say is I tell my clients regarding personal property, transportation, things like that, if it's not going to make you sick, i.e. it has mold or it is just, really atrociously damaged or has been impacted by sewage, you can keep that item and have it in there. Or if it is not great and not safe to have it in your home, it's not a bad idea to put it outside and still have it there where the inspector can view it. It is really hard to convince somebody that an item was in a household if they didn't acknowledge it in the inspection. It's not impossible, but if it's there, it's better. But health and safety first, of course.
And then I think there's sort of a follow-up question on that. So the person says, to clarify, if someone applies for FEMA and their FEMA application is denied, would that affect any future flood insurance applications?
Generally, no. It depends on if they had that flood insurance requirement and they were denied because of that. That can impact future. But if they had no requirement to be insured, they applied for FEMA, they were denied for home repair, maybe not home ownership, that's a different issue, but for home repair for that storm, and then they flood 5 years down the line again, I don't see why that would be an issue. For home ownership and occupancy, that might be a little bit more of a barrier to overcome. you're going to want the legal documents to back up, or the documents according to FEMA's new standards to support those claims that you were the owner occupant.
So I don't think we have any more questions. I just want to give a huge heartfelt thank you to all the panelists on this call. I continue to learn more and more every time we talk. I'm so grateful. It's really, really encouraging to know that, you know, as each part of the country goes through these really tough times, that we have people here to rely on and to come together to support one another. And I find it really, really kind and wonderful of you all to give your time today. Thank you so much.